As many of you are aware, Keith Olbermann has returned to anchoring the news on Current, an internet broadcast company. As many of you are also aware, Olbermann was released from his contract with MSNBC by Comcast once they took over the 24-hour news channel. No reason has been given as to why he was released from his contract, but many people believe it's because Olbermann carries a progressive liberal message, while Comcast is a very large donator to the Republican Party. I, like many people, were happy to see that Olbermann return to broadcasting, although he's not a Marxist or even an anti-capitalist. He's certainly one among the liberal establishment of personalities to whom I can say is genuinely honest in what he says. When I hear him speak, I believe he really does want to change the world and make it a better place. It's unfortunate that he does not carry that desire all the way through and see that it is the capitalist system itself that causes the contradictions that prevent us from having the better world. He definitely has his own unique way of bringing his message to people, one that I confess I had originally emulated and then altered until I found my own way of delivering a message. So I was happy to watch the first edition of Countdown to see what kind of message he would bring now that he had left the television network. I've suspected that he was restraining himself in some way just by the fact that he was on a corporate-owned media outlet and had to play the game. Now on Current, he's unfettered by the restrictions of mainstream media places on opinion. It will be interesting to see what he will be saying now that he's uncensored. The first guest on his show was Michael Moore, author of several books and the creator-director of several movies including Bowling for Columbine, Sicko, and Capitalism, A Love Story. He's also a longtime contributor to the show and a friend of Olbermann. The topic on which they spoke of was the invasion of Libya and the American role in it. Quite frankly, I was disappointed what Michael Moore said. I was expecting Moore to be more anti-war and anti-imperialist. The first question Olbermann asked Moore was why President Obama used an executive order to become involved in Libya as opposed to going through Congress. Well, Moore replied that it was easier that way. In doing so, he avoided the red tape. And I agree, to an extent. Sure, it is easier, because if he'd have gone through Congress, the people would have had time to react and begin protesting such actions, and questions would be asked. There's also the fact that not everyone in Congress would agree with beginning a new war. Face reality, it's a war, not some kind of aid program to so-called rebels. Interestingly, Moore points out how according to the Constitution, Congress makes the decision about going to war or not. However, he says that it's a little strange in this case that Obama would do such a thing, given that he's a constitutional lawyer. He also said that if Obama's desire to aid the rebels was just, he'd be able to make a good case before going to Congress to get approval. And we all know he probably wasn't going to get approval. That's why he never did it. Moore also correctly mentioned that in recent history, presidents have declared war without going to Congress for approval, and that he was of the opinion that Obama was going to do things differently. I think Moore genuinely believed that Obama was going to do things the way they are supposed to be done. I find that really naive coming from a man like him. We all know why presidents don't go to Congress for approval. We all knew there wasn't going to be any change, but it seems Moore did. Immediately after Moore criticized Congress for its lack of leadership and initiative, he said the Supreme Court isn't supposed to be making the laws, but they are. Congress is not stepping in to stop them. He spoke how corporations are legally persons, and now corporations can buy politicians with the removal of restrictions on campaign donations, essentially equating speech with money. Money is now the new speech. Again, this has been going on for some time now. Corporations have always basically owned politicians and the entire political process. Yet again, it seems Michael Moore is being naive. I just don't understand how he doesn't see this as always being the way it was. Olbermann then asked Moore if he thought Senator John McCain was right in saying America had a duty to protect people from being slaughtered. Moore replied that you always do, whether they're a group of people in your country or just someone out on the street getting beaten. Of course, they showed their liberal-esque imperialist leanings by not even asking whether or not people were actually being slaughtered. Neither one bothered to mention the fact that the French press had revealed that the French government had been sending weapons to the so-called rebels before the French and NATO involvement was announced or hostilities began. Neither one bothered to discuss or even bring up the so-called rebels were being funded or supported by the U.S. I think it's very telling that they didn't discuss or mention this fact. This is one of those times when the liberal media is supporting imperialism while making it seem like they're questioning it when they're really not. Moore does make a good point when he calls out the leadership for NATO to admit they're trying to kill Gaddafi. It's really ridiculous farce to pretend as though killing him is not their goal. Almost every day a military installation suspected of being his is being hit by bombs, or a home of his are being hit by bombs. It's actually quite transparent that killing Gaddafi is a greater priority than actually attacking Libyan troops that are committing the so-called slaughters. Again, Moore asks why Obama isn't just being honest and going to Congress and making the case for killing him. Well, there's a good reason for that. Because it's political assassination, and that's a terrorist act according to the Patriot Act and international law. It's kind of frustrating that Moore doesn't seem to understand the fallacy of his own question. Why is Obama not making the case for an illegal action? Because it's illegal to begin with. You don't go to the police and make a case for murdering someone who isn't an immediate threat to you. I don't believe Moore doesn't understand that. I believe that he is, in a way, looking the other way on this one. He's doing it either because, one, he believes in removing Gaddafi, or two, he's covering for a liberal president. It's interesting to note here how they are not questioning whether or not the invasion of Libya is justified or not. They're just operating under the assumption that it is. Ironically, or appropriately enough, this is the same stance held by those conservative in the Bush administration concerning the war in Iraq. They spent zero time discussing the morality of the plan to invade and just hammered home this idea of an immediate threat. The same thing is happening here in the liberal pro-imperialist way. It just has its own flavor to distinguish it from the conservative pro-imperialism. Moore also correctly points out that there are several other people and regimes in the world which would also fall into the same description as the Gaddafi government. Moore questions why these people/regimes have not been invaded as well. One, I would like to know the people and regimes Moore was referring to. Two, the answer as to why these other regimes and people are not invaded is obvious. Like NATO turning a blind eye to the Rwandan genocide, there's little, if any, resources to exploit, Libya being a large player in the energy sector in the form of oil. This is also not being mentioned by Olbermann or Moore. Here's where Moore exposes his support for liberal imperialism. Olbermann then asks Moore a good question. Is there a difference between Obama cherry-picking reasons and legal support for going to war in Libya and how Bush cherry-picked reasons and legal support for going to war in Iraq? Moore replied by saying that he thinks Obama really cares about the people in Libya and wants to do the right thing. Well, this is an outright laughable stance to claim the imperialists to claim they have. I mean, after all, the supply forces and operations began right in the oil-producing region. Moore then also said that Bush knowingly lied, which he did, about the reasons and intelligence used in justifying the invasion of Iraq. However, this time around, it's different. Moore said Obama may have overhyped a little the strength of Gaddafi's forces. Once again, no thought whatsoever into whether or not these are actually rebels and not pawns of imperialist powers, despite the solid evidence of it, like the weapons from France. This lack of discussion about such a very important key point shows that they, Moore and Olbermann, are deliberately keeping this information off the air. This is turning into another Iraq, and they're trying to make it appear different this time because it's a Democrat president in the White House attempting to keep the illusion that there is a difference between the two parties, that you really do have a choice at the polls. What this interview on the first episode of Countdown shows us that imperialism really is in the heart of the liberal establishment, and that imperialism lives in the ruling class, no matter how liberal or conservative they may appear. But it's totally different this time.